Hello, my name's Matthew Harrison. I'm a Senior Scientist at the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture. And in this webinar we'll be looking at how to simulate beef and sheep cropping pasture grazing rotations using the model GrassGro. So here I've got the basic template, the initial screen open for GrassGro. To open up GrassGro from the beginning, you just go to your Start menu, you navigate to the GrazPlan folder on your desktop, and then you go to GrassGro and open up from there. There's also a number of tutorials and new features that come up in PDFs that could be quite useful, and I encourage you to have a quick look at those as by way of background. So when you open up GrassGro for the first time, you've got an interface that looks like this. On the right hand side you have what's called farm systems. A farm system is basically how the whole system operates together, so it includes your pastures, your livestock, your management, your climate, your soil, your weather. Everything's in a farm system. And then you have what's called issues, and we'll look at issues in a subsequent video, webinar. But basically what issues are for are they're essentially factorials. So I might want to compare stocking rates, for example, a stocking rate of 3 to 7 to 10 to see what impact that have on the farm system, and you can use an issue or a factorial on one of your farm systems, but we'll look at that in a subsequent webinar. In this webinar we'll look at just our creating an initial farm system simulation and testing for acceptability. So we have a number of standard or example farm systems here which you can maximize and minimize, and you have this little book icon to indicate it's a library. Then you have your custom farm systems library, and you can create folders within that. And you can see here I've created a prime lamb example for Swansea, for Tasmania. So you can either create them from scratch, or you can open any one of these examples and then save it as a new example and modify from there. The advantage in doing this, opening up one example that's already created, is that it's already created, and so all of the components are already entered, but you have to be very careful about checking what components are entered. The disadvantage is that of starting up a new simulation is that you have to enter everything from scratch. So I'll just briefly talk about how you can start up a new farm system simulation from scratch. You just hit this button over here, New Farm System Simulation. Now, this is one of the most important windows of the whole setting up session. Do you want an ungrazed enterprise, a weather enterprise, which is essentially castrated males, just ewes and wethers, steers, beef cows or lambs? And if you choose ewe and wethers or beef cows, you have a self-replacing, so that you get young animals and they breed. Whereas if you choose a steer or a wether or an ungrazed, you've only got one flock or one mob of animals, and so it's essentially much simpler animals, but you haven't got the ability to reproduce. So in this example I have a lamb enterprise, so you would select lambs, you hit OK, and then it comes up with this funny little question mark, which means an exclamation mark, which means well, actually I've still got a lot to enter before it'll allow you to run the simulation. So this is a new farm system simulation window, and it's come up with these blue faces to say, okay, well, you've got to enter these details. So to add property, you double click on property, and within the property subset you have to essentially put in your weather, your climate data and your paddock details. So to put in weather data you double click. Now GrassGro is quite useful in that for Australia in particular it has a number of weather stations, and these contain daily climate data that you need to run the model. So you can either do it here and pick a predefined weather station, or you can zoom in or out on the map, and these blue points here indicate the points that you can actually choose on the map. So I'm going to zoom in to the southernmost state of Tasmania, and in this case I'm going to select, well, let's just say we pick Sheffield. And so it says, okay, I've selected Sheffield there. You can change your default CO2 level. I suggest 390, which is about what's in the current atmosphere at the moment. You can hit OK. And then it's saying, okay, you've chosen the weather for Sheffield. Now you have your paddock. You double click on paddock. You can name your paddock. You put in your area. You put in your steepness, whether it's level through to steep, and then your fertility. So GrassGro doesn't have a nitrogen or a carbon subroutine. It essentially has a fertility factor. which is very sensitive. Fertility meaning 0, which will grow nothing. Fertility of 1 meaning 100% fertility. So good in that way, in that it's quite simplified. Not so good if you want to actually look at soil carbon or nitrogen dynamics. So in this case, we might say a default of 0.7. OK, then we go to soil type, double click. You can either enter the details here, which are very, very important, which determine the plant available water. So you enter it for the topsoil and the subsoil. So FC is field capacity, WP is wilting point, you have bulk density, hydraulic conductivity, and so on. Or, which is what I do, I hit soil defaults. You wait for it to come up. It should come up with, you can either enter the topsoil and subsoil here from default values, so your sandy loam through to silty clay or whatever. Or you can go to the atlas, which again is similar to the soil map. You can zoom in. It shows you the actual soil types across the whole continent. You can zoom in, and now you have to ensure, if you want to pick it from the map, make sure you pick the same point that we actually use. So I can't actually recall. I think it was Sheffield that we picked. Campbelltown, Sheffield is there. Now you can. It sometimes gives you options here as well, which you can choose from. Make sure you look at the details there when you pick them. So hit OK, then OK again. Now it's nominated your soil. Now you have to indicate your pasture type. It's got a number of details in here. I won't go into them at length. You should take care to just have a look at what these values mean. Generally, I don't alter any of these ones down here, the digestibility. Just alter these values up here. One of the most sensitive parameters that the model, so it would have a large bearing on the results, is root depth. It doesn't have a lot of effect, these other values. So we might just say a perennial ryegrass pasture. We'll say a green dry matter, starting green dry matter of 500 kilograms of dry matter per hectare. Dead, it might be 400. Litter, it might be 200. Root mass, say 400. Now root depth, that will depend on your soil type. Obviously, be careful to pick a sensible value here. So your growth will increase the deeper your roots are, and it's very, very sensitive to that. So in the absence of a measured value for this site, 400 millimeters I think is appropriate. We'll call this perennial ryegrass. You can fix legume content if that's important to you. To add a species, you hit this add species and up it'll come, and you can select different species here. So we might have a subclover, for example. You have different options for subclover. It might be 400. You'd have your values in here. Obviously, you'd pay attention to ensure these values are right. For the sake of demonstration, I'm not too concerned here. In terms of growth, so the most competitive pasture species will be the one with the most root depth. In this case, I'll just make it 400 just so that it comes out about the same. And it has your digestibilities in here for the different. DMD is dry matter digestibility. It has different classes here. Generally, you can leave these values as defaults. Just hit OK. Now you've got your soil, your pasture, and you can create another paddock if you like, and just right click, and you can actually go edit, or you can actually update it to the library. In that case, you'll create a default paddock to your library. Then you double click on your livestock. In this case, we can say we may have just medium merino. And then in this dialog box, you can pick your breed. You can pick your ram breed. It might be Border Leicester. We'll just leave it as Border Leicester. Then you enter their fleece weight, their fleece diameter. If you don't know these values, just leave them as defaults. So use defaults for animal and fleece weights. Yes, I do want to do that. Okay, and then hit OK. Your management policy, and we have more exclamation marks here and here indicating exclamation marks and question marks indicating it's not finished. What's my stocking rate? Now this is a notional stocking rate, so in dry soup equivalents per hectare. Let's just say 10, for example. Add your shearing rules. So when are you going to shear? Okay, that's 15th of December, that's fine. Your replacement rule, this is actually quite detailed, this window. So it shows you a little calendar here. This is how long you're holding on to the wethers for, and you're getting rid of them in early May. You're purchasing lambs aged 5 months, a condition score 3, at a weight of 38 kilograms, and they're within the scope of the blue region there, which is what is feedable. if I enter a value here, let's say 20, it's out there and it won't let me proceed because it's outside the reasonable zone. So let's just say 35 or 38, so it's in this blue zone. Now lamb sales, you can sell them at a fixed date, sell them at a target weight, or sell them at a target weight change. I might sell them at a target weight or on a target age, and you just should go into the specifics here and look carefully what you're putting in here. So I might say the first sale on the 30th of April, or sell at 40 kilograms, or by the 30th of April. So I think that's okay. You can either add a cohort here if you like. So these are buying the 1st of January. These are buying the 1st of May. I don't want to complicate it in that case, but you can add as many cohorts as you like. Okay, now we just hit OK. Now maintenance feeding, this is important to ensure they don't die in the simulation, so ensure that if they run out of pasture they actually get fed. So where do you want to feed? Do you want to feed in a paddock or a feedlot? So a feedlot will take them off the paddock, let's just say a feedlot, end them on the paddock when available green dry matter or total green dry matter, so we'll just say green dry matter, end deferment, so in other words put them back on the pasture when the total green dry matter reaches 500 kilos per hectare, which is not much, so I think that's fine. And if the condition score of the thinnest animals in the class falls to 1, you can feed to maintain their condition, so you can do additional maintenance feeding here if you like, but in that case I'm not going to do it. You can also do maintenance feeding based on pasture availability, which is another rule. I'm not going to do that either. So in other words, all I'm doing here is just taking them off the pasture when available green dry matter is less than 500 kilograms of dry matter per hectare. You can add a supplement here, which is important. So in other words, when you take them off into the feedlot, what do you feed them? You can feed a supplement ration as specified below. You can feed stored fodder, or you can do something else. Barley straw, not very nutritious. Let's just say whole barley, and then you can change the nutritive characteristics here if you like. I'd recommend just leaving them as is. You need a production feeding rule. You don't necessarily need a production feeding rule, so I'm just going to say none. Production feeding is, in other words, fatten them up quicker than they'd actually grow. So that's like a feedlotting situation, either in the paddock or the feedlot, but we'll just leave that as blank for now. New pasture rule. Do you want to reset your pasture species as necessary each year in case it dies out? I encourage you to have a play with that and just have a look to see if one pasture species dies out. Generally I leave that as blank, but legumes will get eaten out. So if you want to maintain legume content in the model, hit that reset and nominate your reset date. Irrigation. Do we want to irrigate any of the paddocks? Yes, we can irrigate paddock 1 and then we can nominate the timing and the amount. In this case I'm not going to irrigate. Okay. Add prices. Well, we don't really need to add prices unless you're interested in profitability, but it's got values based on fleece weight as well as the costs, so the amount of hay cutting that you've done, so that's fine. And add cost, you don't have to put costs in either, but ensure that you have got the ingredient of the value of the supplementary feed that you added in either the maintenance feed or the production feed. So in other words, I put in barley here, ensure that we have to have, in other words, ensure that we've got barley there, so add whole barley. If you're interested in costs and doing an economic analysis, you should enter these values for hay cutting as well as for sheep. I'm not going to look at an economic outcome here, so I'm not just going to skip that. You just have to open it and close it. Now we simply, it's got these other tabs here, so it's got a summary of your system, so it's got the costs, which aren't applicable in this case. Then you have the time of the simulation between the 1st of the 1st 1990 and the 31st of the 12th 2005. Show report immediately after testing, yes. Your reports. Now reports are very important, we'll talk about them in a second. You can modify reports, show reports, or capture something there, and we can talk about that later. I just wanted to point out this calendar thing, so this is very important. So really it shows you an overview of your management simulation. So it's really saying, it's a very simplified one in this case. We've got lambs from the start of the year and we're selling them at the end of April. So it's quite a simplified system because we're really just aiming at fattening lambs here and selling them off. We're shearing on the 15th of December and that's it. And then you have a technical description here of the farm system, the weather, the paddock, which is useful for record keeping your pasture details. So if we go back here to your system, now the exclamation mark has disappeared. You're ready to go. So you can hit test. The longer the simulation period, the longer it'll take, but the longer you conduct it for, the more reliable it will be. So let's just hit test for that one. It's going to show the report based on a financial year. You could change that to a calendar year if you like, but generally just leave that as is. And now it will pull up, it says, okay, we've actually done a simulation. Now you have a report. These are very, very useful for determining the acceptability of your simulation. You should look carefully at some of these outputs. So it's got a contents, if you like, a table of contents at the side here with hyperlinks, or you can just scroll through in this way. So it's saying, okay, so what's the mean rainfall of my site, which is quite high in this case, it's over a metre. This is the rainfall distribution by years. Now this is very important. This is the pasture distribution in different years. If you want a bigger graph, you can click on it, just pull it bigger like this. Now what it's actually showing is that this red zone is actually the most, so we're getting about 8 tonne peak, 8,000 kilograms of dry matter in some years of perennial ryegrass, mostly perennial ryegrass. As you can see, subclover is mostly gone after the first year. And so we might say, well, actually there's more subclover than that, so we need to modify the simulation. Importantly to look, what's the peaks and what's the troughs? And that's related to your stocking rate as well as your supplementary feed and that root depth parameter. Hit OK. Now let's just have a look at the other. So here it's showing your dead and dry herbage dry matter. It's showing your stocking rate on your paddocks. In this case we've only got one paddock. Now it's showing you the distributions of rainfall, the long-term pasture growth rate with percentiles, so it's important to look at this 50th percentile. So in the long run you're actually getting about 5 tonnes near the end of December, and you've only got about 2 tonnes around in winter time in July. In the best years you've got a peak of pasture growth, so this is the 90th percentile. In the worst 10% of years this is what growth looks like. Then you have a number of different outputs. I encourage you to look at these in detail. There's a lot there and they're all very quite useful. Ground cover is very important. It's a simple metric that we use to determine stocking rate. So generally we aim for 70% ground cover in 70% of years. So you can do that by eye, for example, by looking at this and saying, well, actually most of the time we've got a lot more ground cover than that, so we can increase the stocking rate at this site or reduce the supplementary feeding. So in this case we actually need more stocking rate. And then it's got ground cover thresholds, methane production if you're interested in it, as well as the technical details at the end. Now, there's a number of things that we could talk about here. One thing I want to show you is how to create custom reports. If you want to create a custom report, it actually comes up here with this little head icon, meaning you've modified it. In this case, I just created a simple ground cover report. So I just select it now and hit show report. You don't have to run the simulation again. And it's just showing ground cover every single day of the simulation, and I took everything else out of the report, and then I can copy that into Excel or do whatever I like. And then to create a new report, you can go to create your default report, hit modify reports, open any one of these, but make sure it's appropriate to the system you simulated, in this case ewes and wethers. Now here we have, this little icon means for every paddock, and you can essentially get every single variable, whether it's sustainability or production or methane or livestock numbers, out of this report finder. So you can create a new table. To do that you just right click and you could say clone. Now it goes to the bottom. So this will clone a table, and then to create a new variable you hit select, and then you've got all the variables in there: rainfall, your main flock live weight by class, total pasture intake, supplement intake, fleece diameter. There's literally hundreds of variables in there. You can get it for each paddock. Won't be appropriate if you've got more than one. You've got your gross margin if you want to particularly look at costs. So very, very, very useful. You can go in there and look at each one of those. If I want to just look at main flock, you can actually increase these and say, well, actually I want to just look at the female base weight, so I might just select that one and hit OK. Now, very important to look at this here. So do we want to display it? Yes, we do. Aggregation. Now, do you want to sum it, average it, count, take the maximum or minimum in general? you've got these two things. You've got aggregation, and then you have this transform up here. So transform is the time period. So do you want to look at months, days, or years, or minutes? And this is the aggregation. So you have to play with this to see how you actually want to get the values to look. If you want simple daily values, you'd put this one to simple, and you'd put this one to none. If you wanted average fleece weight just throughout the year across all of the simulations, you would say long-term average, and that's going to say the long-term average across years between the 1st of January and the 31st of December. Aggregation, I want average. And then decimal places and your units. So just to have a play with that if you want to look at individual values. Otherwise, that's only if you want to create your own report. Otherwise, I just encourage you to use the default report. These reports here obviously are ones that I've created. This button here means clone, create a copy. You can export reports if you like, or import reports from other files. So, and then once we've done that, we just hit yes. If you're happy with the outputs, once you carefully look at these outputs. So one thing I might do is I'll just I might increase the stocking rate, for example. Actually, I recall that the legume was too low, so we might say, okay, I want to fix legume content so that it actually, well, we won't fix legume content. We'll put the subclover back in, and we'll reset the simulation. So we'll make Mount Barker. We'll make it a little bit deeper root depth. We'll go OK. Must be accompanied by live roots. And now, when we go to our pasture rule, we can either fix or we can ensure that it's actually reset at a particular time. So we might reset, for example, on the 1st of January. So it's just day and then month like that. Okay. We might raise our stocking rate a little bit to 14 and then hit test again, and we'll get slightly different results. So in that way you can compare simulation to simulation. You rerun the model again, wait for the report to come up. Okay, and we can see here that the subclover is still dying out. So we need to go and increase the root depth further if we want that subclover to maintain. So it's important to look at these peaks and the troughs. And then the other thing to look at is your ground cover as well as the supplementary feed. So there's the long-term pasture distribution. So long-term pasture growth rate, sorry. So it's hitting about 80 kilos per hectare per day near the end of the season, which is appropriate. Our ground cover is still in the long term probably quite high, so we could potentially increase that a little bit further. You can also look at it this way, so you can say in 70% of years, this value here, 70% of the time we're much above that, so you really want that line to go through about there, this is just a cumulative distribution function of this graph here, so depend on how you want to look at it. And so in that way you just keep refining the system. When you're happy with it, you hit past acceptability test, this button here, then you hit that button there, and you'll see this exclamation mark disappear. So we hit OK. It's disappeared. You probably should rename it something informative. Rename. And we're done. Thanks for watching. In the next webinar, we'll have a look at how we can analyse multiple factors, for example, stocking rate or pasture type for a given simulation. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next webinar.